Well, hello there, and welcome to my wing video. I am so happy to have you all here. All of this has been in my shorts, but I know many of you very much liked these, so this is the long form version of how I made my wings. I wouldn't say take this as a tutorial, but if you want to copy what I did, go ahead and do it. I think they're great. I'm pretty happy with them. There's a few flaws, but come along with me and see how I did it. All right, I shed my wings so I could talk a bit about the beginning of this project. When I started this, I had no idea how I was going to make these wings. I just knew I had to have them because obviously Rito have wings, so I couldn't be wingless. And I originally grabbed a bunch of feathers to make feathered wings because that's, I don't know, it made the most sense. But there's a scale issue because even the largest feathers are for a bird, and I want to be a human-sized bird. So I would have had to use more feathers than realistically wings actually have, and I have a biology degree. I'm not using the biology degree, but some part of me wants to be scientifically accurate if a bird was human-sized. Rambling. I didn't know what I was doing until my friend, bless her heart, sent me this wonderful woman's work, and it was awesome. And the wings are just, they flow. They're wonderful, they're beautiful, and I could not get enough of them. So I scrolled through her work for who knows how long and realized that foam was my answer. And I needed to pull out the airbrush that I got in the downfall of Joanne and use that for the first time. So there was a lot of firsts for me for this project, so let's get to the good stuff. And first, a big shout out, not sponsored, for Ben Franklin, my favorite craft store, for getting me all the things that I needed. I did already have the bodysuit, and I picked up paint, the foam, wire, already had fabric, but I got webbing, and then I have this gray fur that I already had, and we're gonna try to turn it brown so I don't have to buy new fur, but who's to say? I don't love dyeing, but I sure do it a lot for costumes, and it's fine. I've never dyed fur though, so we're gonna hope this works. And I realized as I dropped the fur in, this probably wasn't gonna work because for one, I wanted it to match my hair color and it didn't quite look like that. And then I realized how much this was matting. So pulled it out, rinsed it, threw it in the dryer for a few and tried to brush it out, but alas, it just wasn't gonna work. So I purchased fur that already matches my hair. While I waited for that to arrive, I switched to my computer where I started making my pattern. I started with a very blocky version of my arm so I could get the correct dimensions of it so I could scale an image of a wing onto it that I could then trace. Now, you do not need a program like Illustrator to do this process. You can do it on pen and paper and with lots of measuring, but this makes it a lot easier, so I always suggest everybody learn how to use a to-scale drawing or modeling program. It makes patterning so much easier. Now, the wing reference I put down here, I chose for two reasons. The first was it seemed the best lengthwise and width-wise for fitting over my arm and not dragging on the ground and still looking good. But then it also happens to be the same shape of wing as a red-tailed hawk, which is the bird that I decided to base this off of because it is white and brown, which was kind of my intention. I wanted to go from my skin tone to my hair tone, so unlike my dice goblin, I would not have to cover myself in body paint this time. Then I used this image to try to trace the feathers, both the primary and secondary feathers. I wanted to get them at least mostly correctly shaped. This worked okay, at least for the secondary feathers, but I did decide for the primary feathers to find a scientific image and trace the literal feather. Sometimes the perfectionism wins and I need things to be as accurate as possible. Once I had those looking pretty, it was time to move them over to the wing so that I could lay them all out and make sure that they were ready to go. I did have to distort them slightly so they were long enough, and it It's fine. They're close enough to scientifically accurate for my brain to be happy. These filled up the red area of the wing, and then I had to go and trace even more feathers for the other section. But once I had them all laid out, that is when I gave them all number or letter designations to get them ready to print. This is another benefit of having the Adobe Creative Cloud, because I can take it from Illustrator straight to a PDF and then print it out in Poster, all of that jazz. But once I lose my student license, I will not be paying for this again, and I will figure out a way to do it without that. I will keep you posted on what I discover, because easy pattern making makes the cosplay process so much nicer. Just a matter of tiling it out in the print settings and going for it. I'm also all for sharing, so this will be available for free on my website, linked in the description, but it will not have written instructions. If it has enough interest, maybe I will write those, but I don't have time for that at the moment. There was a great many pieces of paper for these ones. And this is what they look like when they come out. They have a very small little cross in the bottom corner so you can line them up when you tape them together, but then it's just like any paper pattern you've purchased on Etsy or anywhere else online. You gotta tape them together and then cut out the individual pieces. It is super tedious, and with this project, I had really wished that I could use my Cricut, so then I wouldn't have to do the paper. I could have just sent my digital models straight to the Cricut and cut out foam on there. But my Cricut Maker that had the blade to cut foam stopped connecting to my computer, and the Explorer that I have doesn't have a deep cut blade. So I was stuck cutting these out on paper, and then also, you'll see soon, cutting all of the foam by hand too. The one benefit this did have was that I could make a paper mock-up of the whole wing structure and make sure it was the correct size before I actually cut anything. So might have actually done this paper one at least, but still would have been nice to cut them on the Cricut. Once I got the base all figured out, I moved to a larger surface and I laid out all of the feathers, and with much more tape created an actual wearable mock-up. I did try to pick this up. It is too floppy, but it was able to tell me the size was correct. Onward to another day. Now time to double this amount and more in foam. But first I have to completely dismantle the whole entire mock-up because I am not printing a second group of this and I need them as templates. But now begins my almost literally 8-hour day of cutting foam. I seriously wish my Cricut had been working. But moving on, it is what it is. I have two different colors of foam here because there are more brown on the back side of the wings and more white on the front side, so I thought it'd be easier to paint if some of these were already brown. Gonna tell you right now, this was one of my choices I wish I had done differently. I would have much preferred having them just painted brown because this brown ended up not quite matching the paint later on. It is what it is though, and it's not horribly noticeable, so I'm going with it, but just fair warning to anyone who also wants to do this, just stick with white foam and paint it all, and then it's a lot more consistent. And for those that actually do want to make this, I'm using 2mm foam. It is a mix of craft foam sheets from Ben Franklin, which is who knows what kind of foam, and then EVA foam that came in a roll. I think the craft foam is also EVA foam. They feel the same, but ever so slightly different. They both work. I had to get the EVA foam rolls because these primary feathers are way too long. Took me a full day to cut out all of these feathers, so fair warning, not a fast process. Look how many feathers went into this thing. Last step before I was able to move on is I took all of the ones that went from the rolled foam and ironed them flat. Foam is great and you can mold it with heat. So now they're all ready to go and start the next phase, which is to add a vein to all of the major feathers. This is one of those steps that I couldn't tell what the person I am referencing did, so I am experimenting. Basically, I need to figure out a way to put this jewelry wire down the center so that the wings will be flexible but won't be floppy like the paper was. This is also how I'm going to attach the larger feathers, which is why I am folding the wire in half and leaving a little loop, and that loop is where I will attach it to the wing. As you can see, I'm not doing this on any of the feathers for this experiment because I don't want to ruin any of them. Now to smooth out the wire and contain it, I am using a piece of pneumatic tubing that I rescued from the trash at a previous place I worked. Not all of you will have access to this, but I think you can get this kind of tube at the hardware store, or at least something very similar. I also want to try another method the next time I do this using boning, because I think that would be way easier to work with than this wire was, and won't have as many of the problems I ended up having in the end. But for this set of wings, I tested 2 different ways of hiding this and attaching it to the feather itself. One was just sticking a piece of stick-on foam, I think it's like 1 millimeter thick, directly on top. And then I have this foam clay here that I am going to try and smooth it out a little bit with. Now, I learned something later that I think would have made this actually work a lot better. Can't really tell in the video, but I was getting a ridge that I really, really hated and I couldn't figure out how to smooth out. Learned later you can water like your finger to smooth out the foam clay, and it probably would have worked great. But I didn't like how the foam clay worked. I also tried it just directly over the pneumatic tubing to see if I could skip the stick-on foam, but I still had a little ridge and you could see the tube. So I didn't go with this method either. Did a quick drying process with a heat gun to see if I could sand it any smoother, but either my foam clay just wasn't dry or it just peels up when you sand it, so that also didn't do what I wanted it to. In the end, I decided the one with the stick-on foam did look a little bit better, and it's what I'm going to continue with. So we are on to the actual feathers. All of my printed templates did have the vein line in it, and I am going to attempt to keep that exactly with the shape it is, which is why I went with wire, because it's curved, and I really want to try boning the next time, because this ended up being very fiddly and annoying to do, but it turned out looking good, so at least there's that. I changed it up slightly from the test that I did. It's still a wire that is wrapped in pneumatic tubing, but then I actually left a little gap at the base of the stick-on foam to try to smooth out the end with foam clay. This mostly worked. It still had the ridge that I really hated on the foam clay. Again, water your finger and rub it smooth. I learned that later and really wish I had known it. I wasn't super in love with this still, so I think I ended up only doing 4 feathers this evening, and then I was going to let them dry and see what they looked like in the morning. But until then, I decided to play with my airbrush, which I've never used before, so let's find out if I can figure it out. Okay, so in theory, I need to water down the paint and put it into this little chamber. And then I think I just zoop. So let's find out if it's that easy. It works! Alright. That's actually a lot easier than I anticipated. And it just swoops. Cool. Now, do I want to try real feathers? Yeah, why not? We have my reference. Can't do these ones yet. They are still drying. So we're gonna start with the little ones. These ones I do not put a vein on because they are just tiny and I don't think the vein will be as important or noticeable. But I am still trying to add a bit of the line pattern to them so that they look as realistic as possible. Oh no. Oh no. Note to self, the lid of the paint well, it doesn't unscrew. That'll cause a mess. When you need to add more paint, just pop off the lid, it does not unscrew. Because I was still experimenting with the paint to water ratio, I did end up wiping this off multiple times to kind of see if I could get a better paint to water ratio so it actually stuck and dried without rubbing off. I think I'm pretty happy with these, all things considered, and I did make sure the edges were nice and brown. I don't need to paint the other side because it's up against the other wings and you'll never see it, which is great. Got a few more sets of feathers done this evening and had switched to a lighter brown to try to see which brown I like more for when I move on to the bigger feathers tomorrow. I can't decide currently, so I'm gonna sleep on it. On to day number 5 of these wings. Already been running an experiment this morning to try to make this seam less visible because the foam clay didn't do as good of a job as I had hoped, and paint does not make it better. Spray paint also does not make it better. So I have figured out a whole new way to make the vein, and I think while it's still going to be visible, it's going to be way less noticeable. So let's put this on the rest of them. This still involves sticking the wire inside the pneumatic tubing and covering it in a stick-on foam, but I am using a much narrower piece of foam and gluing it down with contact cement, which means I am wearing a respirator all day long because this stuff stinks even through the respirator. Downside of using this adhesive is you have to wait a bit for it to dry before you can actually stick it together. So it just added one more step to this process, but I think it's going to be way stronger and it looks a lot better. So we're going with it. I did also give up on adding any of the foam clay to them because I just decided it was clean enough without it. I also underestimated how much wire I was going to need for this, so I had to make another trip to Ben Franklin, but that's okay. They had what I needed. And then it was back to adding veins. To try and save wire, at some point I did start not doing a full double layer of wire down the whole tube. It really didn't need it, just the one was fine, and then I just tucked in a little bit extra to make the loop at the end, and it worked just fine. So, you don't need as much wire as I used on all of the original ones, it'll be fine. Took me the rest of the day to get all of these veins added on, but I am really liking how they're looking, and I am just hoping that this will stick really well and not come off later. All right, the sun is setting and I finally finished the feathers. I need to prime them now, especially these ones that I used as test subjects this morning. I have 2 different primers and I ran a test for them on actual scrap this time. I can't tell the difference, so we're just gonna grab one and go. I'm priming these with spray paint instead of trying to use the airbrush because it has much higher coverage and I don't want to have to use a bunch of white in the airbrush. So we're doing this to try to cover up all of the yellow and slightly smooth out some seams. Feathers! It is time to airbrush. Some of these are too long to fit inside my craft tent, so we have come outside. Hopefully the wind is my friend. Let's get to it. Starting the day with the ones that I've already done because I decided to use a different color of brown, so I wanted these to blend a bit better with all the other ones. Thankfully, I didn't do very many when I was messing around with the airbrush figuring out how to use it. So we started there and then we just kept going for the next several hours. I genuinely had zero concept of how long this was going to take me. It just keeps going. Just more feathers and more feathers and more feathers. And also remember, this is just the first of 3 colors that I need to do to create the look that I want. So, bear with me. Let's skip ahead a bit. Onto the next color, which is just a darker shade of brown, because I can't do anything simple and shading is very pretty. The second color just brings the feathers to life. I'm copying this reference picture of individual feathers, so I have all of the correct variety, and they start looking really good, and I'm so excited. I will forever use airbrushing in the future because this is just too good. My favorite part of these feathers is the little squiggle stripes that I'm adding that really bring it to like realistic life. Also, this airbrush, so much easier to use than I ever anticipated. If anyone's ever scared of one, I highly recommend. They're way easier to use than I would have thought. And it creates this perfect natural look to it. 10 out of 10 would recommend the airbrushing. And this is what I did for the whole rest of the day. I spent the whole afternoon outside just airbrushing away. My back hurt a little bit after this, but that's okay. We shrimp for the craft. But look at what I accomplished, and now time for another day of airbrushing. Welcome to another day of me working on my Ren Faire costume. Today I am hoping to get all of the feathers done. I first have to go reprime some of these because I messed up this whole stack. There's not supposed to be brown on one side of these, and I Forgot what side was which. So we're gonna go reprime them because it's a lot faster than airbrushing. And then we were back to doing the exact same airbrushing I was doing yesterday, adding this darker brown to every single one of the feathers. Surprise, it continues. I also have no idea if I just didn't clean the airbrush very well from the previous day, but today, wow, it was clogging so often. And it would be me airbrushing for a half an hour, and then I'd have to spend 10 minutes unclogging it. That was my day. But it's fine. We're getting it done. Whew. Sometimes I question why I choose the most complicated route, like a feather that has a bunch of stripes in it. But then I keep looking at these, and they're so cool. I can't wait until this is done. Whee! And now we're officially out of paint. To the store. Actually, I'm gonna clean this first, because I don't want it to dry out inside of here. And then it's to the store for I think the third time in this project. But zoink, they had what I needed. Okay, we are back with more paint. I got 2 more browns just in case, a new white because that one's really old, and a color for the tail feathers that I realize I should have cut at the same time as these, but it's a different day's problem. Let's see if I can finish this before it gets dark. Spoilers, I don't come back to the tail in this video. Also, I do not finish these before it gets dark, but I am very determined. Found a light, put on a sweatshirt, because Washington summers, and we begin the white. This is actually one of those things I wish I had done differently in this project. I do not like the look of these brown feathers with the white painted on. I should have just done all of them white with brown painted on. I think it would have looked a little more consistent, but we got what we got, and in the end it didn't look that bad, so I went with it. All right, now that I put 2 coats of white on all of the brown feathers, I think I'm actually done. I like these. I have more white to add to all the other feathers, but I have to airbrush fur tomorrow, so I think I'm gonna do that then. I am cold, I'm gonna go back inside, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. We are back inside doing something other than airbrushing. It is time to turn my paper mock-up arm into a fabric arm that all of the feathers will get sewn onto. So I have this like white denim. I don't know where it came from, but we're using it for this project because it's sturdy. And right before I cut the fabric, I realized I should probably lay out all the feathers so I actually make it the right size and shape, because sometimes I go a little too fast. But we're gonna plan this out. I also realized at this point, I mislabeled like half the feathers with the wrong arm. But good news, I just flip what arm they're going on and it's fine. I get them all lined up to get the correct shape, and then I do a little test of what it will look like with the fur on it, which, oh, the vision, it's coming to life. I ended up marking a little further down from the paper I originally did so that it actually follows the correct curve that I want it to. And then, of course, we cut. I am not one for precision cutting, especially in costume making. I just kind of go on vibes and general rough shapes, and most of the time it turns out. I don't know if you should trust me on that one, but wing it. You might be surprised what you end up with. Gonna give the edges a quick serge because I have this machine with me for headband making. I don't normally have a serger, but I sure will use it when I have one accessible. For the interior structure, I'm doing a strip of webbing down the edge where the feathers will attach, and then also straps vertically for holding on my arm. I'm also adding snaps at the strap around my wrist so it is tighter and I won't feel like the wing is going to fall off. But I needed to wait for some assistance to mark the placement of those straps, so we're gonna jump to the fur. Now my tips and tricks for cutting fur, and this comes from me working at Joann, not really using fur before, but I've cut it a lot. For one, a lot of these high pile furs can tear straight. It's very convenient, makes a beautiful edge, and then if you are going to cut curves like I am, take an X-Acto knife from the back side and just go through that back layer. Try not to cut any of the actual hairs. This creates a way nicer lay and you don't end up with weird choppy fur on the edge of your cuts. Also, I was very careful to make sure my fur was laying down the right direction because it would have looked really weird if fur was going up. So I did cut these separately instead of like back to back just to make sure everything was good. And then back to what I was doing before the fur, because my assistants, aka my mother, has arrived to help me mark where on this denim I need to put all of the straps so they fit where I want them to on my arm. So this is me laying across the table, real awkward like, and my mom being awesome and helping me figure out where these are gonna go. Also, my mom is a genius and suggested that I put elastic for some of the bands instead of just webbing, which I thought that was a great idea. So putting those around my elbow and also like up in my armpit, I guess. And then it'll just be a hand strap and then a snap-on strap around my wrist. In this project, like many of my others, I'm using a hammer-on snap because I think they work a lot better than sew-on or crimp-on. I just have to find the right tool. I also decided before hammering this down to actually add a bit of extra thickness just because I know these snaps can take a lot of force to open and close, so I didn't want it to rip a hole in the denim. Most of the time I use these snaps in leather and it's fine, but better safe than sorry. And I did find the correct tool. It's this little long stick one. Always use a plastic mallet on them. Don't break your tool. On the webbing side, I burned the edge so it wouldn't fray, and then also to keep it from fraying, instead of cutting a hole for the snap shaft, I poked a hole with my awl and then just wiggled it around until I could get all of the threads around it. This way it won't fray and rip out super quickly. And with that fastened on, it's time to do one final test fit and then take this over to the sewing machine to get all of these straps added on. For everything on the edge, I'm using the serger because it just makes a very pretty edge, and then I'm taking it over to my sewing machine for all of the inside bits. I tacked on all the straps with some forward and reverse stitching, maybe a little excessively, but they're well attached, and then we have a sleeve and it fits. And then the fur. Hee wobbly, wobbly, wobbly. So exciting. Continue. And then it was finally time to start the feathers. I had to lay them out one more time to make sure they were all in the correct order before I sewed them on. And I don't know why I couldn't keep these in order this whole time, but that's fine. We kept laying them out, and then I marked where they would go on the strap, so I'd have the perfect spacing, and then it was back to the sewing machine. And here begins the very tedious process of sewing these onto this strap. I had to go extremely slow, and at some point started using the hand thing because, well, I broke the needle quite quickly into this process. So maybe I should have just hand sewed these to begin with. I got them eventually. We kept going. Finally made it to the end, and I also realized that this wasn't the most secure attachment for these. They were pretty wiggly and they just weren't tight at all. So I came up with two solutions. The first is to add this boning to the top edge of the fabric in hopes maybe that helps. And then I'm gonna hot glue everything. So boning first. I only took the boning to my elbow because that's where I really needed to be stiffened the most, and then it was to the hot gluing. Hot glue is probably my best friend for any kind of cosplay or craft in existence. It it helps everything. So I first, of course, made all of the feathers lay all pretty again. They were so floppy. And I glued the ever-loving crap out of them. I made a strip so it was like stiffened all the way down, and then I put a big glob on top of every single one in hopes that they just never move again. This has been through a lot of glue, but it was totally worth it for how much better this wing laid after the fact. And then once I got this whole strip done, it was time to put the secondary feathers on, which once again required me to lay them all out. I suggest to everybody, label everything, because it'll never make sense again unless everything is labeled. So maybe do a better job as you're airbrushing to keep these straight. Might make your life easier. But we got them all arranged and looking pretty, and then more glue. Huzzah for the glue. Also, if anyone is curious, I use Gorilla brand high temp hot glue. I just think it works better than low temp, and Gorilla is a trustworthy brand, and I go through a lot of it, so it's always worked for me. And this was a extremely tedious process. I think in the end it took like 2 hours to do all of the hot gluing on a single wing. I made sure there was glue at the top of these secondary feathers and then also across the primary feathers. I did a little loop so they're attached in another point, and I think it made it pretty sturdy. They move well, so use all the glue. It just makes it lay nice, move, but then also not stupid and floppy. So glue, all the glue. Once I finished the front side, I then flipped to the back side and glued on the secondary feathers on that side. So even more gluing, but it didn't take a horribly long time, and I really like how these are turning out. And we have a wing. This is so cool. I am so excited. There's a lot I still need to do, like the whole other wing, but it's midnight. So we're gonna go edit this and go to bed. Hello. We have some wings to finish today. I promise they will be done at the end of this video. I already did the second one to the same point I got this one, so now I just have to add the fur covering and do some more airbrushing. Let's get into it. All right, the first thing I have to do today is add another bit of fur up here because I forgot my arm is rounded and I cut this flat. So I think once my arm is under it, there's gonna be a gap here and we don't want that. So thankfully this works in my favor because the bird I am basing this off of has a brown streak here and then it fades to white. So I'm gonna do some brown and a little bit of white. I'm also gonna lay the fur this direction and then it should be good. Now, unfortunately, with the direction of the pile and the pieces I have left, I have to cut a bunch of little tiny pieces and sew them together so it all lays nice and the way I want it to. The joys of fur. But I think it's gonna be fine. I'm putting a little, like, triangular cut on this final bit that's gonna be white. I hope it looks correct. This mildly broke my brain, but I think it's gonna look great. I once again did the curved cuts from the back with an X-Acto knife, so I had my nice fluffy pile still. And yes, I think this is gonna lay right, so let's get it to the sewing machine and get all of these pieces put together. This is also the first time I've ever sewn fur on my sewing machine, so I am trying to be very careful with the pile because I don't want it to, like, look weird. So I'm, like, being extra super careful that is laying the correct direction before I sew, and when I have brushed it all out, I think it disappears pretty well, so I'm impressed. Fur is actually a little easier to use than I thought. I did go into the seam and kind of pick out extra hair, so I think it ended up turning out pretty good. I'm happy with it. I gave it a quick iron so that the seams would kind of lay where I want them, and then I actually trimmed up the front bit to make it feel a little more organic and less squared off. I got this front sewed onto the back solid brown, and then it was time to add it to the wing itself. Made the choice to sew it kind of on the back side of the wing so I didn't have to deal with the straps on like messing up with the fur at all, and I thought this would be fine. I sewed it all together, but I realized that it didn't quite sit the way I wanted it to. The front would like fold into the back, and there's just a little bit of white that I don't want visible on the back. So, well, it's time to seam rip this off and sew it to the other side. The lay of fabric is very important in sewing more than like 2 layers together. 2, obviously, it looks the same no matter what you do. But if you have 3, you kind of have to pay attention to where the seam wants to actually lay. And now it's time to lay that out on the correct side. I have to be a lot more careful now because I need to make sure the straps don't get caught in any of the seams, because that would defeat the purpose of my strap. So, be very careful. I'm using my little clips because, well, I hate pins. The clips are much better. So, getting that clipped on, and then back to the sewing machine. We zoom down that seam one more time, and then I take a look, and yes, it is finally the way that I want it to be. Huzzah. And I hope you didn't think we were done with the hot glue, because I am going to use even more of it, because I did not want to sew through multiple layers of foam and fabric and fur. I thought that might destroy my machine. So we are hot gluing this fur down to the feathers. I'm not doing a big long line, I'm just doing little tacks here and there so it doesn't flop or move too bad. And then on the front side, I decided to add some Velcro into this front seam so my hand could escape and actually be useful while wearing these wings. I wasn't entirely sure how this was going to work for me, but I was hoping for the best, and this is maybe going to work. I'm only hot gluing it because I don't want any more stitches to show up on the fur. I am also putting hot glue down the upper arm strap so that the fur stays nice there too. It's took a lot of glue. I had to reposition a couple times, but that is a-okay. I rolled it down gently so it laid exactly how I wanted it to on top of the feathers, and then I did just like I did in the back and just tacked it down where I believed it needed it. I put a nice arc over where my fingers are going to sit, and then added a bunch more hot glue to the Velcro in hopes that it would stay on, because Velcro and hot glue don't mix, but I tried. And just like that, I had a full wing. I'm pretty dang excited. And with a little magic, I have a second wing. It was made the exact same way, so nothing very fancy there. Now it is time to take them outside once again for more airbrushing. Okay, we are back. And first things first, we're gonna brush these out. Now, those looking all pretty. This is the bodysuit I am wearing underneath it, so what I basically need to do first is make sure the fur kind of fades into this color. And I ran a little test, so this in theory should work. The way that I found that this worked the best is if I did a bit of airbrushing and then also took the comb to it as I was airbrushing, because it kind of, well, the airbrush moved the fur around and this made it lay back down, and yeah, you can't really see it on the camera, but it's here. This looks so good. I don't know if it comes across on camera. It's so subtle and awesome. And because I figured out you can't see this at all on camera from the angle I'm working at, I'm going to skip ahead and hope that the next color I add in you might actually be able to see. Look, you can see me putting paint on things again, because I decided to go rogue and add some of this lighter color to this brown that I thought was just too brown. So, we're fading those also. Unfortunately, on the fur, you still can't see the color that I am adding to this, so, just trust me that there is color getting added, and it makes all of the difference. Forgot to press record, but I did add white to all the tips of the feathers, and then I switched to the bodysuit, where I added some fabric medium for acrylic paint and added a feather effect to the front of the bodysuit. I don't know how much of this is actually going to be seen when I'm wearing these wings, but I like to be realistic, so feather effect, here I come. Can you tell how tired I was getting at this point in the project? I was nearing the end. I got this. But it was time for the exciting part that I think you will actually be able to see. To make this a red-tailed hawk, I needed little tiny bits of orange/red. It's orange, so we're using orange. First round, way too orange. So This was actually a bit of a time-consuming process to mix the correct orange color. At some point, I stopped mixing it in the cup because that was just a dumb choice. So I created a cup of orange, and it took me a hot second to find the right color, but once I had it, I will actually be able to use this for the tail also because I mixed it in a big cup. So, huzzah, I have a nice, subtle, rusty orange that is not vibrant and unrealistic. It probably took me 20 minutes of adding paint to this cup before I found a color I actually liked, but I'm pretty happy with this. It's still bright, but it is not obnoxious. And look, you can actually see me adding color to the wings. This little tiny molted effect is so cool. If anyone does this kind of thing, airbrushing is phenomenal. I did not realize how good you could do airbrushing on fur to make it look really realistic, but it is amazing. So I added in this orange bits. I focus kind of on the transition between the brown and the white because that's where it is on the normal wings. Most of this orange will be in the tail that I will make eventually, but for now, I have a little bit of color. It makes it look super realistic. I added a little bit here and there and everywhere, and then got some added to my bodysuit so that blends, and switched to a dark brown to finish up my bodysuit. Added a little bit on the front, but mostly was trying to turn the back really, really dark. I had a lot of problems with my airbrush clogging at this point, and I wanted to be done so bad, but had to troubleshoot a few times. Eventually I got it to this point, and I'm just gonna roll with it. It's close enough to what I wanted, and I'm not gonna waste any more time struggling with my airbrush and this dark brown. But with that, it was getting dark, and my 9-day adventure in wing making has come to an end, so let me show you what I got. What? We have wings. They are done. I'm so excited to wear these at the Ren Faire in 4 days. The close-up final reveal is here. I cannot believe that it only took 9 days to make these. It was a lot, but here they are. This is after I wore them to the Ren Faire. There's a little bit of paint cracking, and some of these are trying to come off, but other than that, they held up great. The molting didn't come off. It just looks so nice. I added one final piece to them, which is this strap here with a snap right at the top of the shoulder to attach to my chest piece, but also like it can attach to a bra strap or a tank top, who's to say? And they turned out great. I cannot wait until the next time I get to wear them. So, how did you like the video? I'm so happy to have gotten these done. I will be posting the long form of the final bit of this costume, hopefully soonish. I can't make any guarantees. I'm absolutely dreadful at editing long form content, but the short is up that reveals the wings with the rest of the costume, so go ahead and take a look there. And like every good YouTuber, I will say, like, subscribe, comment, engage. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the wings, and I will see you all the next time. Ollie, stop. You're in my shot. Okay, I'll give you love, but out. Go, scoot. I'm trying to show them my wings, not you. Okay.